A 1895 family dinner photograph was discovered, and a historian uncovered a shocking secret. Thomas Rivera had worked as a genealogical researcher for 12 years, helping families trace their ancestry through the complex records of the American South. His Atlanta office was a small space filled with filing cabinets, reference books, and 3 large monitors showing genealogy databases. On a humid September morning in 2024, he got an email that would change everything. It was from the estate manager of the late Mrs. Dorothy Henderson, who had passed away at 97. The manager was sorting through her belongings and had found boxes of old family photos in the attic. There are some very old pictures here, and the family would like to know more about their history before we donate them to a museum, the email read. That afternoon, Thomas drove to the Henderson estate in suburban Atlanta. The house was a large ranch-style home built in the 1960s. Most rooms were empty except for a few leftover boxes. The estate manager, a young lawyer named Jessica Chen, took him to the dining room where she had spread out the photographs. "Most of these are from the early 1900s, she said. Mrs. Henderson cared a lot about preserving family history, but she never labeled anything. Thomas studied the photographs carefully. There were dozens of formal portraits, wedding pictures, children playing in yards. Then one picture stopped him cold. It was bigger than the others, mounted on thick cardboard. The photo showed a formal dinner from the 1890s. A white family sat around a lavish dining table. The room looked rich, with fine china, crystal glasses, and an ornate chandelier above. 7 people were at the table. A serious-looking man sat at the head, a woman at the opposite end, and 5 children lined along the sides. Thomas grabbed his magnifying glass. The image was very clear, every detail sharp. He counted carefully. 7 people. "Do you have any family records?" he asked Jessica. "Census data? Birth certificates?" She handed him a folder. Mrs. Henderson had kept everything. "Here's a family tree and census records." Thomas compared the photo to the records. According to the 1900 census, the Henderson family in 1895 had Richard Henderson, his wife Margaret, and 4 children, Robert, Elizabeth, William, and Catherine. 6 people in total. But the photo showed 7. His heart raced. One more child than the record said. "Jessica," he said slowly, "I think we might have a mystery here." He took high-resolution scans and all the Henderson documents back to his office. He worked late, studying every detail on his large monitor. The back of the photograph had faded writing, "Christmas dinner, 1895, and a photographer's stamp, Whitmore Studio, Atlanta, Georgia. The family arrangement followed tradition. Richard Henderson sat at the head, upright in a dark suit, his gray beard neatly trimmed. Margaret sat opposite in an elegant dark dress with a lace collar. Her expression was calm but careful. The children were arranged by age. Robert, 16, beside his father. Next was Elizabeth, 14, sitting straight. On Margaret's side were William, 11, and Catherine, 8. Then there was the 7th person, a girl about 8 or 9, sitting between Catherine and Margaret. Her dress matched the other girls, her dark hair neatly tied back, but she was slightly apart from the main group. Thomas zoomed in on her face. Her expression was serious, almost watchful. She seemed deliberately placed to be seen but not fully part of the family grouping. He checked census records again. The 1890 census had mostly burned in a fire, but the 1900 census was clear. Only 4 children. He searched birth and death records, newspaper notices. Nothing showed another child. Around midnight, Thomas called Dr. Patricia Foster, a historian at Emory University who studied Southern family life and hidden histories. "Patricia, I need your help," he said. "I found a photograph that doesn't match the records." He emailed her the scans and census information. She typed, paused, then said, "Thomas, this is unusual. A child appears in a formal family photo but isn't in any official documents. In the 1890s, this could happen for several reasons, and none were pleasant. Hidden children, families taking in orphans informally, children whose parents had died violently, sometimes as victims of lynching. Such children couldn't be legally adopted, but families would still care for them. Thomas felt a chill. This girl might have been a rescued child, living openly in the household but never officially recognized to keep her safe. The next morning, Thomas dug deeper into the Henderson family's past. He needed to know who they were, their beliefs, and why they might have taken such a risk. Census records showed Richard Henderson was a textile merchant who became wealthy in the 1880s and 1890s. Property records showed the family owned a large house in Atlanta's Inman Park, then a well-off neighborhood. Newspaper archives gave the first real clues. Thomas found a short article in the Atlanta Constitution, March 1891, "Local Merchant Speaks Against Violence." It described Richard Henderson speaking at a Chamber of Commerce meeting, criticizing lawlessness and mob rule. The paper's tone was dismissive, showing his opinions were unpopular. He found more articles. In 1892, Henderson wrote a letter condemning a lynching in nearby Decatur. In 1893, he donated to a legal defense fund for a black man falsely accused of theft. Newspapers attacked him each time, calling him a Negro sympathizer and worse. Patricia arrived at Thomas's office around noon, carrying her research. She had been studying similar cases of white families secretly sheltering children of color. She spread out her documents. After Reconstruction, as violence against black communities rose, some white families, often with abolitionist backgrounds or strong religious beliefs, would care for orphaned children. They couldn't do it officially. Adoption laws were strict, and in many places it was illegal for white families to raise black children. So they hid them in plain sight, saying the child was a servant's daughter, a distant relative, or simply not recording them. The children lived with the families, got private education, but had no legal identity. Thomas showed Patricia the enhanced photographs he had created, zooming in on each person's face. The mysterious seventh child had delicate features, dark eyes, and an expression that seemed older than her years. "Look at how Margaret is positioned," Patricia pointed out. Her hand hovered near the girl's shoulder, not touching, yet protective. And Richard's gaze was on her, not the camera. This wasn't just a casual inclusion. They wanted her in the photo. But why photograph her at all if they were hiding her? Patricia smiled sadly. Because they loved her. Because she was family, even if the law didn't recognize it. The photograph was proof of that love and of their quiet defiance. Thomas decided to research. The photographer next. Whitmore Studio operated in Atlanta from 1887 to 1902. City directories showed the studio's location on Peachtree Street, a building demolished in the 1950s for a parking garage. The Atlanta History Center, however, had preserved some of Whitmore Studio's business records, donated by the photographer's grandson in 1976. Thomas requested access and spent an afternoon in the climate-controlled archives, carefully examining ledgers and correspondence. The records were meticulous. Every photograph session was logged with the client's name, date, type of sitting, and payment received. Thomas found the entry for December 20th, 1895. Henderson family dinner, special arrangement, $15. $15 was a huge sum in 1895, around $500 today. The note's special arrangement caught his attention. What made this session special? He found a letter tucked in the ledger, dated December 18th, 1895, from Richard Henderson to James Whitmore, the photographer. "Dear Mr. Whitmore, I wish to commission a family photograph for Christmas to be taken at our home during our holiday dinner. I trust you are a man of discretion. Our family includes a child who is not in public records for reasons I hope you will respect. We wish her to be included in this portrait as the beloved member of our family that she is. I will pay whatever premium is necessary for your complete discretion. Sincerely, Richard Henderson." Thomas leaned back, heart racing. This was it, direct evidence that the Hendersons had deliberately included the hidden child in their photograph and had sought a photographer who would understand their situation. He photographed the letter and continued searching. He found 2 more special arrangement entries in Whitmore's ledgers, both for families Thomas later discovered had quietly sheltered orphaned children. James Whitmore, it seemed, had been more than a photographer. He had been an ally, helping document families that society tried to erase. Patricia was thrilled when Thomas shared his findings. "This is remarkable. You're uncovering an entire hidden network. Families rescuing children, photographers preserving them, all beneath the official record. But we still don't know who the girl was," Thomas said. "Her name? What became of her?" "That will be the hardest part to discover," Patricia replied. Thomas knew that if his theory was correct, the 7th child might be the orphaned daughter of lynching victims. Somewhere there would be a record of racial violence in Georgia between 1887 and 1894. when she would have been born or orphaned. The research was grim. He spent days going through newspaper archives, NAACP records, and databases documenting racial violence. The sheer number of cases was overwhelming and heartbreaking. Between 1885 and 1895, dozens of lynchings occurred in Georgia, often affecting entire families. One case stopped him. In April 1888, a black couple named Samuel and Grace Thompson were killed by a mob in a small town called Hateville, just south of Atlanta. The newspaper account was cruel, casually racist, describing Samuel as punished for defending his property against a white neighbor trying to steal his horse. Thomas noticed a single line at the end of the article: the couple's young daughter was not found. He searched for follow-up reports. None. No news stories, no court records, no official mention. She had vanished from history. Calculating dates, if the Thompson daughter had been about 1 or 2 in April 1888, she would have been roughly 8 or 9 in the 1895 photograph. The timeline fit. He called Patricia immediately. "I think I found her. The Thompsons were killed in 1888, and they had a daughter who disappeared." Patricia was silent for a moment. Hateville is close to Atlanta. Close enough that someone like Richard Henderson might have known and intervened. But how can we prove it? "We need more Henderson family photographs," Thomas said. "If she appears in multiple images, we can track her aging and see if she stayed with them, and we need any documents, letters, diaries, that mention her by name." Thomas returned to Jessica Chen. "I need to see everything, every photograph, every paper from the Henderson estate." Jessica looked at him, curious. "You found something, haven't you?" "I think so," he said, "but I need more proof." She led him to the attic, where 3 boxes remained sealed. Mrs. Henderson had said it was for future generations. Inside, Thomas discovered a treasure: dozens of photographs, letters tied with ribbon, a leather journal, and a small wooden box with personal items. He carefully documented everything. The photographs told a story. One from 1896 showed the Henderson family on the porch, 7 people again, including the mysterious girl. Another from 1898 showed the children in the garden. She was there, slightly apart, now around 11 or 12. Then a 1902 photo showed the older children. Robert was a young man, Elizabeth a young woman, and there was the girl, now about 15, standing with Catherine on the back faded pencil writing Robert, Elizabeth, William, Catherine, Sarah. Thomas felt tears prick his eyes. After days of searching, he finally had a name: Sarah. The hidden child had a name. The leather journal belonged to Margaret Henderson, spanning 1887 to 1904. Thomas opened it carefully. Margaret's handwriting was neat and elegant. He found the entry he had been searching for, dated May 3, 1888. "Today, we welcomed a child into our home under circumstances I cannot fully record. Her name is Sarah. She is not yet 2 years old. She has lost everything. We have promised to give her a home, a family, and safety. Though the law cannot recognize her, God has placed her in our care, and we will not fail her." Later entries mentioned Sarah occasionally, Margaret teaching her to read, noting her intelligence, and her nightmares slowly fading. In 1890, Sarah asked if Margaret was her mother. Margaret wrote, "I told her I am not the mother who bore her, but I am the mother who will raise, protect, and love her as my own." Patricia arrived at the estate that evening. Thomas showed her everything: the photographs tracking Sarah's growth, the journal entries, and finally her name. "This is extraordinary documentation," Patricia said. "Most hidden children left almost no trace, but the Hendersons had deliberately preserved Sarah's story. They wanted the future to know she existed." "But why hide her at all?" Thomas asked. "Why not adopt her officially?" "Because it was illegal in Georgia," Patricia explained. "Interracial adoption wasn't allowed. Even informal guardianship of a black child by a white family could bring violence. The Hendersons could have been ostracized, even attacked. Sarah herself would have been in danger, so they hid her in plain sight." "Exactly. To the outside world she may have been presented as a servant's child or not explained at all. But within the family, she was Sarah. She was their daughter." Thomas became obsessed with discovering what happened to Sarah after the last photographs. The final image of her was from 1905, when she would have been about 19. After that, she disappeared from the Henderson family photos. He searched census records, marriage records, death certificates. By 1910, the Henderson census listed only the biological children, no Sarah. Had she left, married, or died? Then Patricia made a breakthrough. While searching records at the Atlanta University Center, she found a registry of students at Spelman College from 1903 to 1907. Sarah Thompson, age 17, listed for the 1903 to 1904 year. Sponsored by the Henderson family. Thomas exhaled. The registry gave her original family name back. It showed Sarah studied teaching and graduated in 1907. The trail went cold again, but Patricia kept looking, checking teacher employment records in Georgia's segregated schools. She found Sarah teaching at a small rural school for black children in Monroe, Georgia, from 1907 to 1910. Then the trail moved to Birmingham, Alabama, where Sarah Thompson taught from 1911 to 1945. She became an educator, Patricia said, just like Margaret Henderson taught her. She spent her life teaching children who looked like her, children who had been denied opportunities as she once had. Thomas found a 1920 photograph in a Birmingham newspaper showing teachers at Carver Street School. Among them was Miss Sarah Thompson. He compared it with the 1902 Henderson photo. It was her, older and serious, but unmistakably the same girl. Further research revealed more. Sarah never married. She devoted her life to education, was active in the NAACP, and helped with voter registration in the 1940s. She died in 1963 at 77, just months before the March on Washington. Her obituary in the Birmingham News was brief. Sarah Thompson, retired teacher, died peacefully. She taught generations of children and was known for her dedication. She had surviving nieces and nephews, children of Catherine Henderson, the youngest biological Henderson daughter. Sarah had stayed in contact with the family throughout her life, considered an aunt by the next generation, even if the relationship couldn't be publicly acknowledged. She lived two lives, Thomas said to Patricia. Sarah Thompson, black teacher and activist, and Sarah, the Hendersons' hidden daughter. Both were real. Both were her. Patricia replied, "Now we can tell both stories." Y spent weeks documenting everything. The photographs, Margaret's journal, lynching records, Sarah's education, and later activism. They contacted academic journals, local newspapers, and historical societies. The story appeared in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution in November 2024. Hidden Daughter: How One Family Saved a Child and Defied Georgia's Racial Laws. The response was immediate and overwhelming. National media picked it up. Historians studying the period were shocked. Thomas received constant interview requests from NPR, CNN, local stations. The Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture called about the photographs. The National Archives wanted the story included in its reconstruction collections. Other academics found similar cases. A professor in Mississippi discovered another white family secretly harboring black orphans. A researcher in South Carolina found letters describing protected children living with families but never officially recorded. The most moving responses came from descendants. People shared family stories they hadn't understood. Mysterious aunts or cousins who didn't fit the family tree, children raised in white households during Jim Crow, photographs of people whose presence had never been explained. One woman wrote, "My grandmother always told us about a white family who saved her mother after her grandparents were killed in a riot in 1898. We thought it was a legend. Now I realize it might have been true." Jessica Chen, the estate manager, was moved. "Mrs. Henderson always said this history was important. She made me promise to find someone who would understand it and tell it properly. I think she knew what these photographs contained. The Henderson family's living descendants, great-great-grandchildren of Robert, Elizabeth, William, and Catherine, came forward. They had vague memories of Aunt Sarah, but not the full story. Michael Patterson, Catherine's great-grandson, contacted Thomas. "We have some of Sarah's letters," he said. "She wrote to my great-grandmother regularly. I never understood why a black woman would write so affectionately to my white ancestor. Now I know. They were sisters." Thomas organized a gathering at the Atlanta History Center in December 2024. descendants of both the Henderson and Thompson families met for the first time. The original 1895 photograph was on display. 15 people gathered, separated by blood, but connected by Sarah's story. Michael Patterson and Dr. Angela Williams, Sarah's great-niece, stood before the photograph. "That's Sarah," Dr. Williams said softly, pointing to the girl between Catherine and Margaret. "My great-aunt. I never imagined seeing her as a child." "That's Catherine," Michael said, pointing to the 8-year-old girl. "My great-grandmother. They grew up together. They were sisters. The families spent hours sharing stories, photographs, and letters. Henderson descendants brought Margaret's journal. Sarah's descendants brought letters Sarah had written to Catherine in the 1920s and 1930s, keeping their connection despite segregation. One letter from 1925 stood out. "I think of those childhood days often. You shared your mother with me when I had lost mine. You shared your home, your family, your life. The world said we couldn't be sisters, but we knew better. Thank you for that gift." Dr. Williams wiped tears from her eyes. Sarah never spoke much about her childhood. It must have been too painful, losing her parents, living in a world that denied her existence. But she kept these connections. The Hendersons gave her more than shelter. They gave her love. The two families decided to work together on a project documenting the full story, donating all materials to a joint archive. They wanted Sarah's story told fully, not as a footnote, but as the main narrative. Patricia suggested a symposium on hidden families and racial justice in the post-Reconstruction South. Universities expressed interest. Filmmakers reached out. Most importantly, the Henderson and Thompson families had found each other. They planned reunions, shared genealogical research, and began building relationships across the racial divide that had separated them for generations. 6 months later, Thomas stood at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. A special exhibition, Hidden Families, Children Saved, Stories Recovered, had been created. The 1895 Henderson family photograph was the centerpiece, enlarged and beautifully lit. The exhibit explored the wider phenomenon Thomas and Patricia uncovered. Dozens of white families across the South secretly sheltering black orphans during the Jim Crow era, risking social ostracism and violence to save children whose parents had been killed by racial violence. Interactive displays explained the historical context, the wave of lynchings, the abandoned children, and the few courageous families who intervened. Personal artifacts brought the stories to life: photographs, letters, journal entries, toys preserved across generations. One section highlighted Sarah Thompson's later life, her teaching, activism, and quiet dignity in the face of segregation. Her graduation photograph from Spelman College hung beside a Birmingham newspaper article about her retirement in 1945, after 38 years of teaching. Another section explored the legal and social barriers that made rescues, like Sarah's, necessary and dangerous. Maps showed the reach of Jim Crow laws. Timelines documented the erosion of black civil rights. Charts illustrated the spike in racial violence during the 1890s and early 1900s. The exhibition also asked hard questions. How many children weren't saved? How many families tried to help but failed? How many stories remain hidden, their evidence lost or destroyed? Dr. Williams contributed personal items to the exhibition: Sarah's teacher's badge, her reading glasses, and a Bible inscribed to her, "With love, Mother Margaret, Christmas 1895. Michael Patterson stood beside Dr. Williams at the opening reception, looking at the photograph of their shared ancestors. "It's strange," he said. "We've been family for over a century, but we didn't know each other until now." "Sarah knew," Dr. Williams replied. "She kept the connection alive through letters, through her relationship with Catherine and her children. She made sure the truth wasn't completely lost." Thomas had been invited to speak. He stood before the crowded gallery, voice steady but emotional. "When I first saw that photograph, I noticed an inconsistency, a seventh person who shouldn't have existed according to official records. But Sarah wasn't an inconsistency. She was a child who deserved to live, to be loved, to have a family. And the Hendersons, at tremendous risk, gave her that." He paused, looking at the photograph. "This story reminds us that resistance takes many forms. Sometimes it's public and dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet and hidden, a family opening their door, a photographer preserving evidence, a mother teaching a traumatized child to read. These small acts of courage saved lives, Sarah's life, and probably many others we will never know about. The exhibition traveled to Atlanta, Birmingham, and 6 other cities. It inspired new research, sparked community discussions about historical racial violence, and connected families separated by the color line but united by stories of rescue and courage. Schools began teaching Sarah's story. Children learned that history isn't just about presidents and wars, it's about ordinary people making extraordinary moral choices. For Thomas, the discovery had transformed his career and his understanding of history. He learned to look beyond official records, to trust family legends, to examine photographs with new eyes. How many other stories were waiting, hidden in attics and archives? Sarah Thompson had lived 87 years, taught hundreds of children, and fought for justice in her quiet, determined way. For much of that time, her childhood was a secret. Her rescue unacknowledged, her family connection denied. But now, more than a century after that Christmas dinner in 1895, Sarah sat at the table with her family. She was visible, she was counted, she was remembered. The 7th child was hidden no more. In the photograph, frozen in time, her expression remained solemn and watchful. But Thomas liked to imagine that somewhere, somehow, she knew her story had finally been told. That the love that saved her, the family that claimed her, the courage that sheltered her, all of it had been recovered from the shadows and brought into the light. The Henderson family had photographed her because she was their daughter, no matter what the law said. And now, finally, the world knew it. Sarah Thompson's life, once hidden in the shadows of history, had finally been brought into the light. A child rescued in secret, a family who risked everything to protect her, and a legacy of courage and love now stood visible for the world to see. Her story reminded everyone that history is not only written in laws and official records, but also in the quiet acts of bravery and compassion that shape lives across generations. The 7th child at the Henderson table was no longer forgotten. She had a name, a family, and a place in history. And through the photographs, the journals, and the memories preserved, Sarah's voice would be heard forever. At last, Sarah Thompson was seen for who she truly was, a daughter, a sister, a teacher, and a quiet hero of her own story. The love that had protected her, the courage that had sheltered her, and the family who claimed her despite a world of danger had endured across time. The 7th child at the Henderson table was no longer invisible. Her life, once hidden, had become a bridge between generations, a testament to resilience, and a reminder that even in the darkest times, acts of compassion can leave a mark that lasts forever.